Good evening and welcome to See You at USC. I am your Monday night host, Alexia Narcisse, and I am here with the Dean of the USC Gould School of Law, Dean Guzman. Stay tuned. We are here live with Dean Guzman of the USC Gould School of Law. How are you?
Hi, nice to see you.
Fantastic, and yourself as well. So you are currently the Dean of the Gould School of Law at USC, but prior you've worked at UC Berkeley, you've traveled around the world, you've written books, you're an author. I mean, I don't know what you haven't done based on your resume and seeing all the work that you've done over the past, years.
Well, thank you. That's what you get to do as an academic.
Oh, of course. Now, I'm wondering how you ended up here at USC. Of all the options that you clearly had, what made you choose Southern California?
So the question of why I decided I wanted to be dean here is I was doing administrative work in my capacity as a faculty member at Berkeley. And when you do a certain level of administrative work, you start getting asked if you want to submit your name for deanships and to interview for deanship. And I mostly turned them down because I had a list of things I wanted in a school at which I would be a dean. And then as it happened, my eldest child started 9th grade in high school, and I thought, okay, I'm out of the dean market because I don't want to move while my kids are in high school. And then USC called, and it turned out that it ticked off everything on my list of what I wanted in a school I might be dean at. And so notwithstanding the risk of being engaged in bad parenting, I applied and wound up getting the job, and so I moved down in the summer of 2015.
Wow, okay, and if you don't mind me asking, what was that list?
Sure, so at least some of it was, I wanted to be leading a school that is going to be prospering and thriving and grow and moving forward. Not, there are some jobs that I describe as managing decline, and I wanted no part of those. So okay. Then the question is, well, what law schools are what are the characteristics of a law school that's going to thrive looking forward? And I think one, being in a big city is enormously helpful. That, for example, if you're recruiting faculty, now faculty typically, or at least very, very often, come with a spouse or a partner. And so if that spouse or partner needs a job, it's going to be a lot easier to recruit them in a city where there's lots of job opportunities. Right? Once upon a time, that wasn't a concern for universities. So that's big city helps. It also helps because big cities are better for the job market for our graduates. Even though our graduates can work anywhere, there's always a little home field advantage. So that's one. Another one was I wanted to be at a university that was thriving. The law schools in many ways operate autonomously from universities, but there's always lots and lots of connections, even in the most independent law school. And a university that is thriving gives more opportunities for the law school. And there are few universities in the country thriving more than USC right now, so that was a huge appeal. I spent my career until coming here at a UC school, so a public university. I think public universities are fantastic. The University of California system is an unbelievably great system, but I didn't want to be an academic leader in a place where I felt that the resources were being pulled out and the ability to do the kind of innovation and change and adaptation to the world we're in that law schools all have to do. It seemed to me that was extraordinarily difficult to do in that environment. Whereas here, I feel like the university is set up to make that possible. That is, I'm expected to do those things. And they're the things that I think are essential for success.
Okay. Now, I noticed that you went to Harvard for both your JD and your PhD. What really propelled you to go into the field of law? Did you have like some sort of inspiration?
When I graduated from college, and I was choosing between doing a PhD in economics and going to law school. And I decided to do a PhD in economics. And what was motivating me at the time was global poverty. I was very interested in the question of why some countries are poor and some people are poor in that global sense and some are not. So I started studying that in graduate school, and then partway through, a couple years into my graduate education, I sort of looked around and I said, okay, well, assuming you do really well as an economist, what happens to you? And if you could become an academic, certainly, but if you're not an academic,
What is the crux?
you hopefully say smart things about economic principles, and you tell them to somebody. And I said, well, who do you tell them to? Because I want to be that person. I want to be the one making that call. And it turns out that person is very often a lawyer. Not necessarily practicing law, but a government official, or a senior person in a business context, or a policymaker somewhere. If you Google the people who are most influential in terms of making big policy changes, a staggering percentage of them have a law degree. And so I said, oh, well, if I want to be making those decisions, I want to get a law degree. So at that point, I decided to go to law school, and then I wound up studying international law for the same reason I entered the economics program, which was interested in global poverty and global economics.
So you were really just expanding your way of thought by looking in the realm of critical thinking as well as an economic background.
Yeah, and I saw that it's unfair to call economists technocrats. That's dismissive, and I don't want to do that. But I didn't want to be in that role of, or I was more interested in being the role of receiving the information than delivering it. So sometimes I think of it as in Star Trek, the captain is a generalist, and the specialist, the engineer, reports to the captain. And the captain, it struck me, had a more interesting job, even though he or she doesn't know as much about how the engines run. So the economist hopefully knows the economy and the economic reality, which is the thing that was motivating me better than the policymaker. Otherwise, why would they be consulted? But the policymaker's got a broader view and is worried about other constraints and other priorities.
That's a really great perspective. Now, I once had a professor tell me that law school was great just for learning how to think critically. And that's one of the biggest takeaways that he had. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what you felt was your biggest takeaway from law school.
So I think that's absolutely, I'm not sure this is going to answer your question, but I think it's absolutely true. And that's, I think, the dominant reason that lawyers are so successful outside of the practice of law. And why you find them, as I said, in so many positions, because we are trained, the manner in which we educate our law students prepares them to engage in axiomatic thinking, where they say, well, if I know X, what does that mean for Y? It trains them to solve problems, because our whole method of education centers on the idea of there's a problem, what are you going to do about it? So there's a dispute, how are you going to resolve it? There's a case to be resolved, that is, the two sides are fighting over something. What does the law say, and how should it be resolved? It leads you to feel comfortable and have lots of classroom experience with engaging problems and finding a solution. And I think that's what it is that allows law grads to succeed so much in so many different areas of our economy.
Multiple realms. Now, I did notice that of all the people that I've spoken to who have gone to law school, they all have these different experiences from different schools. So I've heard of the cutthroat universities where there's pages torn out of textbooks. I've heard of the more helpful universities where people are actually willing to work in cohesive groups to solve different problems or work on papers together. What was your experience? I'm really curious at a school like Harvard that's so renowned.
Well, so my generation thought of this movie, The Paper Chase, which was in early 70s. It was before my time too, but that was. But other law movies since then have perpetuated this stereotype of it being this brutal, cutthroat place where people fail out. I don't think that law school exists anymore. It certainly doesn't exist in the tier of elite law schools. Mercifully and appropriately, they've become much better places for learning, in which students have. There's much more ways in which the institution supports the student. So I don't think there's any that fit that caricature. Now there is a range, and I don't really know why law schools acquire these cultures, because the students are coming from the same population. There's, some have slightly higher LSAT scores than others, but otherwise they're essentially the same cross-section of students. And every law school has students who come from all different majors in all different parts of the country. But they do acquire these cultures that are either more or less type A or more or less hard-edged. My experience at Harvard was pretty good. Now, to be fair, I was coming out of a PhD economics program where nobody was going to wait for you. So it wasn't that it was the students were mean to each other. It was keep up or get out. And law school didn't have that feel to it. Law school was much more supportive. And the thing you learn in law school is a little different. So I sometimes describe it this way. There's almost no concept we teach in law school that I couldn't teach to you right now in 5 minutes. The thing is that we give you a billion of them, right? It's a volume operation. We teach you things that are relatively understandable, but then they layer one on top of the other pretty rapidly. And so
you just have to catch concepts quickly, it sounds like.
Yeah, and you have to find a way to create a model in your head or a construct in your head that allows you to understand the big picture. And so it's, drinking from the fire hose is one way of thinking of it. And that changes the feel because it's not like in technical subjects. So in the hard sciences, I didn't study the hard sciences, but I've had it explained to me, and as a familiar feeling I learned in my PhD, which is you get a problem set, and 2 hours later, the page has no marks on it because you've been staring at this not knowing where to start. Studying law doesn't have that feel. Instead, you've got to be able to consume very large amounts of information and ideas and figuring out what to do with them.
Yeah, okay. So now you're in a position where you're on the other side of the table. And I'm curious as to what it's like for you when you guys are looking at prospective students and what strengths you see that a lot of your students you select have. And I know that a lot of people reiterate the concept of being quick at reading or being a fast writer or being able to divulge a lot of information at once. What do you feel are the top strengths that a successful law student should at least begin developing within their first year or so?
So I think it's all of those. So we have the luxury that the students who get into our school are all smart. And not only that, they've all excelled in college. So we're able to screen really quite well. It turns out and we're hardly unique at this, but law schools are really pretty good at evaluating a student's undergraduate record. The LSAT's a reasonably good test to screen in certain ways. So we do pretty well in terms of making sure that every student in our classes is capable of doing the work and has prospects to succeed. Once you're in law school, then I think all of those things, sort of an ability to take information that is delivered kind of an in-the-weeds way. You get a lot of the information at a very low level in the sense of lots of detail, and being able to figure out what the 20,000-foot view looks like. And if you can operate at both of those levels at once, which is tricky, that's a huge asset. And then you got to work hard. It turns out that there's a lot of sweat equity if you want to do well. And so the students who get that and kind of are willing to do that, they have an advantage.
Wow. Well, this is great insight. We're going to come back right after the break and continue this conversation. Stay tuned. We're back live with Dean Guzman of the Gould School of Law. How are you today?
Hi.
Fantastic. So before the break, we talked a bit about your time at Harvard and working at UC Berkeley as well. But what I'd now like to learn a bit about is what you guys are doing to change campus currently. Now, I know that they have implemented a immigration, not office, pardon my language here, immigration clinic on campus within the Gould School of Law. So I'd like to learn a bit about what you guys are thinking of maybe planning with that.
Well, we have a fairly long-standing clinic that we call an immigration clinic. And when we say clinic, what we mean is that we have students who, under the supervision of a faculty member, are representing real clients with real cases. So they deal with mostly, or at least substantially, asylum cases, people who've been detained in the U.S., are seeking asylum, and our students represent them through the proceedings, and with a very high degree of success, get them permanent status in the United States. Meanwhile, we've recently, within the last 3 months, developed a program that we're calling the Legal Advice Program, in which the same personnel who are immigration experts have been speaking with folks on campus, that is students, staff, faculty, about the new immigration, the prior executive order. I'm guessing we'll do it with this new executive order, about what that means for people, what their options are, where they stand. And then meanwhile, the provost and the university have made immigration a priority for and I'm been asked to head a committee that is trying to understand or trying to think through how, at a university level, we can approach this. Usually, academic research is done either by individuals or in small, relatively small teams. So the question is how you get a big, complex research university to wrap its arms around this problem. And the provost has identified several of these problems that he calls wicked problems. So this is one of them. So I'm trying to think through that question. How do you address immigration from a research perspective? There's obviously tons of questions about the impact of different research, of different immigration rules, or the way immigrants affect our society or the way rules affect immigrants. Then there's a related but slightly different set of policy questions. What can we say to policymakers about what the consequences of one rule or another are, or what better or worse policy might be? And then there's like our clinic, there's a direct services component that might be present.
Okay.
What can or should we be doing as a university to directly interact with people outside the university who are themselves immigrants, who are affected by immigration rules and so on. So that's at a very early stage. I don't have any answers yet, but we're trying to think about how we think productively about all of that.
Okay. Now, I noticed that what's so unique about this new program is that you have a bit of a perspective, having a father who was an immigrant and came from the Dominican Republic and was in Canada and didn't speak any English, from what I understand.
So it's true. I myself am an immigrant because I came from Canada, but my journey was relatively benign, crossing the border to go to graduate school. But my father grew up in the Dominican Republic, speaking only Spanish, and was sent at the age of 13 to a boarding school outside of Toronto in Canada. This Dominican kid in the 50s, when it wouldn't have been particularly easy to arrive as a foreigner, not speaking the language. And so he went from age 13 to the end of high school at this boarding school, and then went on to college in Canada and wound up staying in Canada, marrying my mother, who was sort of British stock. And here I am.
That is so unique. And it's really cool because Canada just has a completely different political climate with Trudeau and a lot of the people that are in charge there. So I can only imagine the juxtaposition between going there and then coming to the United States, where we're a country that's really strong politically, but we're still amidst right now developing a stronger sense of unison, I guess we can say.
Well, it's true, though. Remember, I've been here 25 years.
Yeah, I forget.
But there's a big difference in the immigration has a different valence in Canada. We don't have a large border with in which the level of economic standing on the east side of the border is radically different. Our only borders with the U.S., our only land border. So that changes things. Canada has a very large French-Canadian population.
Very valid.
Which is not true in the United States. The United States has a much larger African-American population, whereas Canada doesn't have a single, unless you include French-Canadians, it doesn't have a single sort of ethnic group that is so large relative to the general population, except a kind of Caucasian ethnic group, which is similar to the U.S. It's a mix of all sorts of European backgrounds. So the way that plays out in Canada is different. Canada has embraced something it called multiculturalism for longer than the U.S., but the Canadian version has always been, because we don't have a large African-American population, we don't have anything like the large Latino population the U.S. has. I say we, I've lived in the U.S., it's really them, and we as the U.S.
Yeah, who do you
now.
affiliate with? Yeah.
Well, I'm a U.S. citizen too now, so I guess I've got the we's, I call them both we. But Canada has lots and lots of ethnic groups or nationalities that are relatively small in number, a few percentage of the population.
Okay.
So it has a different feel to it than the United States.
Okay. Now, I'm curious as to what lessons you feel like you've been able to pass on to your kids coming from two different countries, because so many Americans really have a bubble perspective in the sense that they've grown up in a suburb and lived in that suburb their entire lives. But I'm assuming that from understanding the way you've traveled and how well-versed you are in international subjects, your kids have great perspectives of the world.
Well, that's the goal. I mean, my wife and I aren't unique in this, but we've attempted, it seems to me the danger in the United States, because it's a big country, it's the most powerful country in the world, it's a massive economy.
Really, with a picture of your family up here.
Oh, there they are.
Not to scare you.
The risk is that you can be very insular, because you're not required to look outside as much, because so much is going on here. the international news is often about the United States, whereas in much of the world, certainly in Canada, the international news is about someone else. In Canada, it's about the United States. So we hope that our kids have something of an international view that is, at some base level, they appreciate that most of the world is somewhere else, that there's lots of stuff going on outside the United States. But you know, every parent has this problem, which is there are values you want to pass on to your kids, but their reality is different. And sometimes if you fail to pass those on, it's all for the better, because progress sometimes happens when the later generation has a different view that is in some sense more appropriate for the world they're in. And sometimes you hope to pass, obviously we hope to pass on the things that are good. We'll see how we do. Our kids have had a chance, they're very fortunate, they've had a chance to travel some internationally, and so they at least report that they know about the rest of the world.
Yeah. Now, do you think they'll end up being USC Trojans?
We'll see. My eldest son is a junior, so
Oh,
it
so he's
won't
got
be
a year
long.
left
Yeah.
before such a difficult senior year, but he'll enjoy that part. Now, within the School of Gould, I understand that you guys really have developed like a more immersive program, in the sense that like you guys do a lot of volunteer work, and we have the USC Volunteer Day of Service. There we go, not volunteer day, but Day of Service. What has that been like for you, being in a position of leadership when you're new to this role? I mean, it's been about 2 years now, but you have the power to really change the way that things have been going, as well as like keeping the current structure. What has that tug of war been
Well,
like?
the great thing about a law school, and our law school in particular, is that the students do a lot of that stuff. That is, the students are motivated. We have this great luxury. We try to focus on providing great education to our students and provide an environment where our faculty can do productive research. But in doing that, there's endless opportunities to also do good for the world. So I mentioned the immigration clinic. We actually have 6 clinics, and also 5 others plus immigration. Every one of them serves clients who would otherwise not be able to pay for the services they get. Our student groups, of which there's no end, there's a huge number, many of them do this. They sort of seek out opportunities to contribute in some way, sometimes connected to their mission or to the particular group they are, sometimes just because they want to do something productive for society. So that kind of all happens organically. We try to focus, I think my role is to focus on how we can assist students in the law school, but that to me includes students we can bring in. So the favorite program I've started is what we call our first generation professionals program, which is what it sounds like. So we identify students who we've admitted and who are the first in their family to graduate from college. And we try to identify ways that we can make them more successful in law school and more successful when they leave law school and start their careers. Because we know that there are hurdles they face that are in addition to hurdles that people who have parents who have professional backgrounds, or maybe people who've grown up in more affluent circumstances. So that's, I view that as central to my role. That is, if we can improve access, and this is one tool to improve access, it's not so much that they're getting into law school differently, which they're not, it's that we're giving them great opportunity to succeed in law school, and then access to the profession, because we're giving them hopefully greater opportunity to have choices when they exit law school and enter the profession. So I try to, I think that it's important for every law school, and certainly every law school dean, to figure out how to open the doors as widely as possible, so that what you're letting people in is, in a perfect world, would only be their academic ability. And so we find as many ways as we can to get rid of whatever else might stop students from arriving and thriving.
Okay. Now, at this point in your career, you've had so many accomplishments. Do you have an idea of what you want your legacy to be?
Well, that's a big question. I'm only 18 months into this job. No, I hope that whenever it is that I'm done being dean, that I'm perceived to have left the school in better shape than I found it. And I found it in great shape. So it's not one. You asked earlier about my desiderata for a law school that I might be dean of. I mean, one of them was that it couldn't be a reclamation project. I wasn't interested in that. So I came to be dean of a law school that was in tremendous shape, that was thriving, at a university that's going gangbusters. So my hope is that I can essentially keep that momentum going, position the law school to be successful, which means lots of things, but includes attracting ever better students and ever better faculty, and giving the students we have ever better opportunities. I sometimes say to alumni that my job is to increase the value of their degree and to make a law school they could not get admitted to. So that's what I try to do.
And I think you guys have done that within at least the last 2 years. So I have to thank you for coming on today and for taking the time to come and speak to us. If we have students who are watching that would like to become engaged, that want to become active in the law school, whether they're undergrad or grad, what ways can they do that?
Well, they can just call our admissions department, go to the web and look at our admissions department.
Perfect.
For students, USC students, we have, as I say, a small number of undergraduate classes, so you can try out some of our undergraduate classes, all of the above.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you all next week.